Although React is an awesome framework, it can be sometimes difficult to understand, and that is because React employs a very different ideology to web development and, and especially front end web development that gets a little tricky to understand. So don't worry, I'm going to clear out all of the doubts you have about React JavaScript using a Star Wars analogy. In this video, we're going to learn three main things: the React component structure and how different components are laid down in React, React state and React props, how the change in the state of the application trickles down as props in different components, and most importantly, why are we using React? Why not some other library? And before we start, I need to give you a quick recap of what has been happening in episodes 4 to 6 of Star Wars. Now, if you've been following Star Wars for a long time and you've watched all of these episodes, it'll be really easy for you to follow. But those of you who haven't watched Star Wars, even then, it'll be very easy for you to follow because it's a very simple analogy and it's going to come in handy later when you start developing React applications. So, to fill you in to the Star Wars episode 4 to 6, this is what is the situation basically. Now, Darth Vader is hunting down the rebels relentlessly, as they are the last resistance against the Galactic Empire. The rebels, that are led by Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker, must fight and exploit vulnerabilities within the Empire. Darth Vader uses a variety of tactics to try and discover the movements of the rebels, including an army of stormtroopers, a fleet of starships, and a variety of scouts. So this brings us to the current situation, which can be explained with a flowchart that looks like this. Darth Vader has deployed three different factions: the Imperial Army, the Imperial Navy, and military intelligence. All of these different factions are looking for the rebel base in different locations. The success of this mission depends heavily on Darth Vader's leadership, because all of these three factions are directly reporting to Darth Vader and then standing by for commands from the top. So let's say in a hypothetical situation, the Imperial Army finds the rebels' location in a far-off planet. Now, the best thing for the Imperial Army to do would be to update Darth Vader and give him the rebel location. Darth Vader, being the leader he is, he will then trickle down that information to the Imperial Navy and military intelligence. Once that happens, the Imperial Navy and military intelligence will have the rebel location. They can use the rebel location to move towards the Imperial Army, where the rebel base had been found. Then they can act upon the commands given by Darth Vader to take the rebels down. This analogy is what sums up the functionality of React in a nutshell. There are two types of components: the high level components and the low level components. The high level components are components like Darth Vader, and the low level components are components like Imperial Army, Imperial Navy, military intelligence. Darth Vader has a state, and this state contains the rebel location. Once this state is updated, it passes the change in the state to the Imperial Navy and the military intelligence via props. And these props is what these components act upon. So to understand this, we will move this analogy to our to-do list application. In our to-do list application, we have three main components: the app component, which is inside a red rectangle, the task list component, which is inside this blue rectangle, and the task components, which are inside these blue rectangles. Now, the red component can be summarized as a Darth Vader component, because this component actually makes calls to the API, gets the data, and displays on the and passes the data in, stores that data in its state, and then passes that change in state to these blue components, which can be understood as the faction components. These components take the props as their input and display whatever is being given to them. So the structure of our application looks somewhat like this. We have our app component, which is stateful, which means it contains state. It's a higher order component. Then we have a task list component, which reports directly to the app component, which means that it takes commands from the app component. And we then have the task component, the lowest order component even under the task list component, and this also does not contain any state. All of its information is passed down from the app component via props. Now let's understand two different scenarios. The first scenario is when a user creates a new task list. This is similar to the case where the army was able to find the rebel location and update Darth Vader about it. In this case, the user is creating a new task list and updating our app component. The app component learns about the new task list. It updates the state, and whenever the state gets updated, it trickles down the other components, in this case only the task list component, as props. So the props trickle down the task list component, and task list component renders the new task list that was created by the user. The next scenario we want to look at is when a user creates a new task. In this case, the user creates a new task, and that changes the state of the app component, which means that we are able to add a new task to the list of tasks that are stored in the state of the app component. Whenever the state changes, it trickles down as props to the task list component. So for a specific task list, a new task has been created. This trickles down as props to a new task component, which is rendered onto your web page. This is basically how React works. This is how state works. This is how props work. The good thing about React is you only need to write your code to update the state. You don't have to worry about props. Till the time you're passing props to the correct locations, your program only updates the state. This makes your code really maintainable and organized, because there are less events you need to handle, and there are more events that React will handle for you. So this takes us to the next question: why are we using React, and why was React made in the first place? As you know, React was made by Facebook, and they were trying to solve a problem which was there at the time when frameworks such as jQuery and AngularJS were popular. In those libraries, the the HTML or the component document did not have any hierarchy at all. So in our React application, the app was above the task list component, and the task list component was above the task component. But in frameworks such as jQuery and AngularJS, this was not the case. So whenever you try to update something that was contained in the app component, you had to manually update the task list component and sequentially manually update the task component, which made communication between different modules or components on a web page really cumbersome to handle and made the code look really ugly. React came in and solved this problem by giving the document a hierarchy. This hierarchy was later called as the virtual DOM, which is basically an organization of React components in the same way as an HTML document is organized. So this now that we know why React was created and why we are using React, this brings us to our next question: why are we not using some other modern library such as Angular or Vue.js? And the answer is pretty simple. For Vue.js, the community is not that big. Community support is much smaller compared to React, and available plugins are much smaller, so you will have a really difficult time getting started with Vue.js. With Angular, the API or the specification of the framework is very unpredictable. It keeps on changing frequently, and they recently launched Angular 2 and 3, which are very different from the original AngularJS that was released. And because of this, it has caused a certain level of ambiguity in the community as to what to do with the framework. This is the reason why we are choosing React. React has an excellent community support. It has one of the biggest communities on GitHub, and it provides you a lot of pre-made components out of the box, so you can get started with making your app and not worry about small configuration details that make your work hectic. So I hope you learned something valuable from this lesson. In the next video, we'll be coding our UI using React components. We'll be laying down our higher order and lower order components and coding our UI. So see you in the next lesson.